Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Doctor, could you please state your name and spell them for the benefit of the court reporter?
My name is Doug Kelley, D-O-U-G-K-E-L-L-E-Y.
And are you a doctor?
I am.
And what kind of doctor are you?
I'm a forensic pathologist.
What is a forensic pathologist?
Well, pathology is the field of medicine that involves the study of disease and trauma in the human body. Forensic pathology is a subspecialty of that, which specifically involves the principles of medicine and science as they apply to the law. So as a forensic pathologist, we're concerned with determining the cause and manner of death in people, and typically we act as medical examiners in medical examiners' offices. So we'll look at those issues in people who fall within our jurisdiction.
And where do you work now?
The Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office.
And are you aware that the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner does handle the forensic pathology for Kenosha County?
That's correct.
What is your educational background?
I graduated from Illinois Wesleyan University in 1988, and then went to medical school at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in Springfield, Illinois. I graduated in 1992. I was in internal medicine residency from 1992 to 94 and decided to be a forensic pathologist. My forensic pathology training in pathology is with St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri, and I completed that in 1998. I then came to Wisconsin and did my forensic pathology fellowship with the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office, completing that in the summer of 1999, and then stayed on as a staff member after that.
And have you worked as a forensic pathologist or a associate medical examiner or something in that capacity since then?
Yes, I have.
Do you have an idea of how many autopsies you've performed?
I'm at or a bit above 6,000 at this point in my career.
Now, are those all homicides or are those all different kinds of deaths?
Oh no, those are all kinds of different deaths. So homicides are only a part of what we investigate.
Now, did you become involved with the autopsies of Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber?
Yes.
I would like to show you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 20. Do you recognize this, sir?
This is a copy of my signed autopsy report on Joseph Rosenbaum.
And is it true and accurate to the best of your knowledge of a copy of your report?
Yes, it appears to be.
I'd like to move Exhibit 20 into evidence.
No objection.
Sir, if I'd ask, Doctor, I'm sorry, if I'd ask you to put that down and let's look at the other exhibit there, which has been marked as State's Exhibit 21.
Okay, Exhibit 21 is a copy of my signed autopsy report on Anthony Huber. It also includes the two-page toxicology report from our toxicology laboratory.
Is that a true and accurate copy of the exhibit or of your report?
Yes, it is.
I'd like to move Exhibit 21 into evidence.
No objection.
Doctor, do you hold any board certifications?
I'm board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and in forensic pathology.
And do you hold a medical license?
Yes, in the state of Wisconsin.
Are there any professional organizations to which you belong?
I belong to the National Association of Medical Examiners, to the American Academy of Forensic Science, to the Wisconsin Coroners and Medical Examiners Association.
Now, Doctor, I'd like to focus on Mr. Huber first. Do you recall when you did the autopsy on Mr. Huber?
Yeah, the autopsy on Mr. Huber was done on the morning of August 26th of 2020.
And that would be the day of or the morning after that he deceased?
That was the same morning that he was pronounced deceased, yes.
Now, how is a body brought to you up in Milwaukee?
When someone is brought to us, our investigators admit them to the facility. They are given a unique identifier. They are then basically stored in refrigeration until we have the opportunity to perform an examination on them.
In this case, you were able to do an examination on Mr. Huber fairly quickly?
Yes.
And how do you begin, let's ask it this way, how did you begin your examination of Mr. Huber?
Well, an autopsy examination, it consists of many components, but the first thing that we do, or the first thing that I do, when somebody comes to me is I look at them as is. I will look at them, take photographs, collect any evidence that I find, and then we'll remove any clothing or anything else from the body. Again, examining the body, collecting any evidence I find, taking photographs, doing what's necessary. Those photos are taken before anything is cleaned up, and so that's the next step, is to clean everything up, any fluids that are on the surface of the body, any dirt. And then again, same process, looking at the body again. The final thing that we do is do the internal examination, which is really what I think more people are familiar with when they think of an autopsy. We make incisions that allow us to look at the organs and tissues, and again, we are looking for any evidence of trauma, any evidence of disease. We're collecting evidence as necessary, specimens for toxicology, taking photographs, and in the end, we put together all of this information from the external and internal examination to determine the cause of death.
And were you able to determine the cause of death to Mr. Huber?
Yes.
And what was that cause of death?
Mr. Huber died from a gunshot wound to the chest.
And is that an opinion given to with a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
It is.
And what can you tell us about this gunshot wound?
So Mr. Huber has an entrance wound that is just below the left nipple. It basically travels through his chest and creates trauma to both of the lungs and specifically to the heart. There's a lot of damage to the heart. So he has a large amount of blood within his body cavities, his chest cavities. And the projectile didn't exit. There's actually a bruise and with some scraping to the surface, and it's located to the right shoulder just beneath the collarbone. And in that location I collected a bullet fragment. So this is the single gunshot wound, and it created lethal injury involving the heart and lungs.
Now, why would that gunshot wound have been lethal? What would have killed Mr. Huber?
The trauma to the heart and lungs is pretty extensive from this wound. So he bled from the wounds that were created by the gunshot.
Did you find any blood inside of his body?
Yes, he had blood within both of his chest cavities.
And do you recall how much blood?
He had about 1,200 milliliters of blood, or over a liter of blood to the left chest cavity, and he had 2 liters of blood to the right chest cavity.
So, to the best of your knowledge, would it have been the loss of blood that caused death, or the damage to the organs, or a combination of both?
A combination of both.
Now, what was the trajectory of the bullet, or of the wound path?
This wound path had a trajectory that was left to right and upwards.
Now, when you're talking about trajectory, what are you relating it to?
Well, in order to have a standard set of criteria to to be able to discuss trajectories, we put the body in something we call anatomic position. And simply put, the anatomic position is with the person standing straight up with the palms forward. So the person's left is left, the person's right is right, superior and inferior, up and down, and front and back are relative to that person. So it's that simple. We're just creating a standard position that we can that we can relate to.
So, Doctor, would I be demonstrating the anatomic position right now?
That's correct.
So, even if I was, let's say, shot in my stomach area from someone on the ground, and the shot went up. I'm sorry, let me reverse that. So no matter where I was shot, it would matter the bullet, how it traveled from my head to toes and from my left to my right.
Correct.
Were there any other notable injuries or findings on Mr. Huber?
Mr. Huber had some little abrasions or scrapes here and there, and he had a good-sized abrasion or scrape to his right thumb, and he had some abrasions or scrapes to his knees and to the inside of his elbows. Little abrasion or scrape to the lower back. When I did his internal examination, he did have a little area of hemorrhage to the left side of his scalp, the deep scalp, but no injuries to the skull or to the brain itself. So the other injuries were minor injuries, scrapes, and little bruises, but nothing of significance.
Is there any way to tell if they were a part of this gunshot incident, or could they have been pre-existing injuries?
No, these injuries could have been pre-existing injuries, and there's no way to age a bruise or a scrape to any accuracy. So all I can say that those injuries were present.
I'd like to show you as marked as State Exhibit 87. Hopefully the monitors have remained on. Doctor, let's see what's in marked as State Exhibit 87. Do you recognize that? Oh, I'm sorry, I guess this isn't on. 1 second, please. Doctor, let's show you what's marked as State Exhibit 87. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
Well, this is the entrance wound. It's not clear in this photo because it appears that this photo is the one with the there is a patch over it which was placed during resuscitation. There's it's kind of a plastic gel-like patch that is placed over wounds to try to contain bleeding, and so that's over the wound, so you can't really see the entrance wound very well in this particular photo.
Now, where is that wound?
Well, you can see it. You can see the hemorrhage there in the middle. It's red.
I'm sorry. I should ask that better. Where in the body is that wound?
Oh, this is the wound to the left side of the chest. It's just under the nipple.
I'd like to move Exhibit 87 into evidence.
No objection.
If I could have the next exhibit, please, Exhibit 88. Now, Doctor, what are we looking at in Exhibit 88?
So this is this looks like a photograph that shows his face and upper chest. What you're looking at there to the purple area to his right shoulder, that's the location of the bullet. The bullet is underneath the skin in that location, so it's right below the collarbone.
There are a few markings on him. Can you take that pointer that is in front of you there and point out this purplish area you're speaking of? There should be a wooden pointer right in front of the, nope, I'm sorry, in front of the, on the
What
table in
about
front of you,
hand
I'm sorry.
sanitizer?
An old-fashioned wooden pointer.
Hand
Oh.
sanitizer.
Looks like a
Thank
bill.
you. And so do I understand from your testimony, that's where you found the bullet,
Yes.
but it was still inside of Mr. Huber?
Yes, this bullet was underneath the skin, right underneath that bruise.
If not already done, I'd like to move this into evidence. The next exhibit, please. This is State's Exhibit 89. Do you recognize this, sir?
Yes, this is another photo of his. You can see his torso and his lower part of his face to the left of the photo. The white things on his body are defibrillator pads, so this is from resuscitation. Again, you can see the two wounds that we just showed. You can see the purple injury to his right shoulder, and you can see the red area of hemorrhage surrounding the entrance wound, which is to his left side of his chest. It's covered by a patch that's meant to contain hemorrhage.
So, doctor, if you just could you please on that screen, to the best of your knowledge, trace what the path of the bullet would have been given those two injuries?
Sure.
So it would have entered on his left chest and then traveled to his right shoulder.
Yes,
That's accurate?
that's accurate.
You may have a seat. Thank you, doctor. That too is about 89 into evidence. Now I'd like to move on to Mr. Rosenbaum. I believe you also did the autopsy with Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes, I did.
Do you recall if these came in at the same time, or if you did one first, or do you have any recollection of that?
I don't have a recollection of that. Mr. Rosenbaum, his examination was performed the following day. It was performed on August 27th of 2020.
And did you do the same procedure that you described Mr. Huber in terms of taking photographs and initial appearances and then cleaning and then doing a further examination?
Same procedure.
Is there anything different about how Mr. Rosenbaum came to you or appeared to you?
When Mr. Rosenbaum came to the office, his clothing had been removed. He had been to the hospital, and his clothing had been removed. Whereas Mr. Huber came with his clothing still on. But aside from that, I don't think. And then the other thing was that Mr. Rosenbaum came with the hands covered by paper bags to protect possible evidence. But other than those things, I think that I don't think there was anything else.
So what did you first notice about Mr. Rosenbaum?
Mr. Rosenbaum had several injuries that were related to gunshot wounds. That's what I noticed initially, yes.
And did you perform any x-rays on or any other imaging on Mr. Huber or Mr. Rosenbaum?
Yes, x-rays are taken prior to the autopsy examination. That allows us to look for skeletal injuries as well as to locate any projectiles or projectile fragments, bullets or bullet fragments.
Were you able to come to a conclusion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty on what caused the death of Mr. Rosenbaum?
Yes.
What was that?
Mr. Rosenbaum died from multiple gunshot wounds.
And in his physical examination, was there anything of note that would have led to a questioning or a addition to that cause of death?
No.
Do you know how many gunshot wounds that you found on Mr. Rosenbaum?
Well, Mr. Rosenbaum has a number of injuries. There are 2 injuries in which the bullet entered the body and did not exit, so I collected bullets from those injuries. There's a 3rd injury that is a graze wound in which the bullet just grazed the skin superficially. And then there is a gunshot wound to the left hand and an area to the left thigh that appear to be separate, but may actually be, I think they're related to the same gunshot wound.
Now, before we get too far into this, what is stippling?
Okay, so I think to explain that I have to back up one step and just remind you that more than just the bullet comes out of the end of the gun. Flame comes out of the gun, smoke and soot comes out of the gun, unburned gunpowder particles come out of the end of the gun, and of course then the bullet comes out. What we do in forensic pathology is we look for injuries on the body or evidence on the body that allows us to estimate the distance of the muzzle of the gun to the surface of the body. And so in contact wounds, we might actually see scrapes around the entrance site from the muzzle of the gun, from the skin actually hitting the muzzle of the gun. It's called a muzzle stamp, so that's a contact wound. Out to a certain distance, soot will actually be able to deposit on the skin. It's obviously not very aerodynamic, so after about a foot or so, soot is imperceptible. And it depends on the weapon to how far that can be seen. But soot will tell us that the muzzle of the gun is within a pretty close distance. And then the gunpowder that comes out, those little gunpowder particles, they also have a velocity to them, so they have energy. So they have kinetic energy that can cause damage to the surface of the skin. So when they hit the skin, if they have enough energy, they can actually cause little scrapes. And those little scrapes or abrasions are little punctate, little round punctate or small elongated injuries to the skin that surround the perforation. And of course, the closer you are, the more dense it is, and as they travel through the air, they spread out and create a wider and less dense pattern around the injury until a point where you can't see them anymore. They don't have enough energy to create an injury on the surface of the skin. That is called gunpowder stippling. So when the gunpowder creates an injury to the skin, we call that gunpowder stippling, and that indicates an intermediate range gunshot wound. So that's just one of the things that we use to estimate the distance of the muzzle from the surface of the body. And then everything else is referred to as indeterminate because we can't tell. We don't use the word distance. We use the word indeterminate because we can't see anything. That doesn't mean that something didn't get in the way or filter out the gunpowder particles and the soot. So we just say anything without any evidence of gunpowder stippling or soot around a wound is indeterminate. So when you talk about gunpowder stippling, we're talking about an intermediate range gunshot wound.
Now there's a term I see in your report called pseudo-stippling. What is pseudo-stippling?
Obviously, anything that hits the skin and leaves an abrasion will leave a mark that we will make note of. If something other than gunpowder hits the surface of the skin and creates those abrasions, we'll often refer to those as pseudo-stippling. And so if the bullet goes through an intermediate target, so if it goes through another body part, if it goes through a window, if it goes through a door, the particles of those surfaces might actually travel with some force downstream and hit the surface of the body, creating those same types of injuries. But those look very different than gunpowder stippling. They vary in size and shape. They sometimes are irregular, some are small, some are big. but that's called pseudostippling, and that can be caused by a number of different things, as I just pointed out. It can also be caused by a bullet ricocheting off of something, so it can break up a surface and cause those particles of the bullet and particles of that surface to travel and hit the body. And so that is called pseudostippling. It's not the same as gunpowder stippling.
I'd like to first talk about a gunshot wound to the pelvis. What can you tell me about that gunshot wound?
So Mr. Rosenbaum has a gunshot wound to the right side of the pelvis. Or actually, it's to the right side of the groin, and that gunshot wound passes into the body and hits the pelvis, creates a quite bad fracture to the right side of the pelvis. And then that bullet continues, and there is an area of bruising to the right buttock. There's actually a little perforation where the bullet couldn't quite get through. But in that location, under that little incomplete exit, that's where I found the bullet from that gunshot wound. So this gunshot wound actually has some stippling, gunpowder stippling associated with it. It's to the lower abdomen, and interestingly enough, where his waistline is at, there's no stippling below that point. So it's not surrounding this entrance wound, it's actually above to the abdomen, but it's because he's wearing the clothing, and the clothing didn't allow that gunpowder to get to the surface of the body in the groin region, but it did in the lower abdomen. So we see that gunpowder stipping to the lower abdomen. It's associated with this entrance wound to the right groin, and that is an intermediate range gunshot wound. So
what is intermediate range?
As I said, intermediate range is, it depends on the weapon and the type of ammunition used. Typically, when you see gunpowder stippling, you're looking at a muzzle to target distance of a few feet. But again, it depends on whether you're talking about a handgun or rifle or such. I would say that in this particular instance, we're talking about something within a few feet, within 4 feet or so.
And that's knowing that the defendant fired with an AR-15 rifle with .223 caliber ammunition?
That's right.
So you'd estimate that, I just want to be clear, you're saying that he was about 4 feet away, or he was within 4 feet?
I'm saying that, well, the best way of putting it is the only way to be more accurate is to test fire the weapon and see what kind of a pattern you get, because the density of that gunpowder stippling pattern might help you somewhat. But this is pretty spread out. All we can really say is that it's within a few feet, but I can't be any more specific.
And what was the path of that gunshot wound?
It's basically front to back and a little left to right.
And in your medical opinion, is this the kind of shot that would resulted in loss of life?
It's not an immediately lethal wound. No, obviously, all gunshot wounds can produce morbidity and mortality, but in this particular instance, this is not an immediately lethal wound.
Now, doctor, I'd like to talk to you about a gunshot wound. Did you find any wounds to the hand?
The left hand has a gunshot wound. It's a very complex wound. There is tearing of the skin to the palmar surface at the base of the index and middle fingers. There's a tear that extends up the middle finger, and there's actually a lot of soot to this area and tearing to the underlying soft tissues. That soot continues to the other fingers of the palmar surface of the hand. This wound is associated with fracturing to the first bone of the index finger, so the bone just beyond the knuckle. That bone is fractured by this wound path. And then it exits to the back of the hand, just beyond the knuckle of the index finger. So if we were to put this into anatomic position, which we talked about a minute ago with the palm forward, the trajectory of this wound path with the hand in anatomic position is basically front to back, right to left, and a little bit upwards.
Did you recover any bullet fragments from that wound?
No.
You mentioned that, was there any stippling or any soot or anything of that nature in this wound?
This wound does have soot associated with it. There's a fair amount of soot to the, like I said, the palmar surface of that hand. So clearly this wound represents something closer, what I call a close range gunshot wound.
And do you have any idea where that bullet would have went after it went through the hand?
I think that it makes sense that this wound is associated with another wound that is to the lateral or the outside of the left thigh. It's kind of to the lower left thigh, but that area has a very irregular, large area of abrasion and multiple small perforations. And in one of these perforations, I actually recovered a small fragment of a bullet. The X-ray shows that there's additional, very, very small metal fragments in the left thigh as well, which I didn't recover. So this injury to the left, outside of the left thigh, this is very characteristic of a ricochet type wound. In other words, I think the bullet hit something, ricocheted, breaking up the bullet and that surface, and that showered the left lateral thigh and created these injuries. It appears that the gunshot wound that could have caused that would be the one related to the left hand as well. So I think that the gunshot wound to the left hand passed through, made impact with the pavement, and fragmenting some of the pavement as well, and that this created the injury to the left thigh as well as to the left hand.
Now, the hand injury, would you consider that to be an injury that would quickly cause death?
No, that's not a lethal wound either.
And this injury to the left thigh, is that the kind of injury that would cause death?
No, it's not.
Would it be fair to say that's something of a superficial wound?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about a gunshot wound to the head. What can you tell me about that?
To the right frontal area of the head. So basically the right lateral forehead. There is a graze wound, as I mentioned previously. So this is a superficial injury in which the bullet grazed the surface of the skin or created an abrasion or scrape. And based on the appearances of the edge of this wound, it appears to be traveling in a back to front and downward orientation. And there's obviously no bullet or bullet fragments recovered from the body on a wound like this. So
when you're saying back to front, the bullet actually made contact towards the rear of the head first and then traveled towards the front of the head?
Yes, it's the angle is sharply downwards, but it's from back to front and downwards.
Now, would that be considered to be a wound that would be immediately fatal?
No, it's not.
Now, doctor, I'd like to talk to you about a gunshot wound to the chest and the abdomen. What can you tell me about that gunshot wound?
Well, this gunshot wound to Mr. Rosenbaum, it enters the back about an inch to the left of the upper midline. And this is the one that passes through the right chest cavity. It creates a great deal of injury to the right lung. There's blood within the right chest cavity. It then perforates the diaphragm at the base of the lung and enters the liver, which is right under the diaphragm. Creates a great deal of injury to the liver. There's fracturing of several ribs in association with this wound path as well. But then the wound path, after creating all this injury, it passes into the right flank, and there was a bruise to the right flank under which I collected a bullet.
Now, we've talked about how the other injuries were not ones that would immediately cause a mortal wound. What impact do you believe that this gunshot would have had on Mr. Rosenbaum?
This gunshot wound is a lethal injury.
And what do you mean by that?
This gunshot wound is the one that would cause death as a result of the injuries to the lungs and the liver with the hemorrhage and the injury to the organs themselves.
Is that to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Yes.
Now, what was the trajectory of this gunshot wound?
This gunshot wound is downward, left to right, and back to front.
I'd like to pull up the next exhibit, please, on Mr. Rosenbaum. TVs are off. Mr. Rosenbaum, start the beginning of this. While we're setting this up, Doctor, were you able to establish the size of Mr. Rosenbaum during this autopsy?
His height and weight, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, he's 5'4" tall, and he weighed 153 pounds.
Dr. Lecter, what's marked as Exhibit 90? What is this?
You're looking at the graze wound to his head.
Now, when you say it's back to front, how can you tell that?
In order to determine that, you have to look at it very closely. You have to look at the edges, and typically a projectile that travels along the surface of the skin will create tearing of the skin. And the way that it tears the skin helps you to determine its direction. In this case, the direction of the tears tells you the direction the bullet is going. So it kind of pushes through the tissue, tears it as it goes, and it's those specific tears as you go along that you can use to determine this.
So you indicated the trajectory of this bullet was back to front and downwards, and that's in the anatomical position?
That's correct.
I'd like to move Exhibit 90 into evidence. Next exhibit, please. Now, Doctor, I'd like to show you Exhibit 91. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is that?
What you're looking at is to the left side of the picture next to that scale with the numbers on it. That's the knee of the left leg. And right above the left knee, you're looking at the lateral left thigh. And the injury is that area of scraping or red abrasion right above it. It's very irregular in its appearance.
Now, is this the injury that you've opined was caused by debris or by a bullet fragmenting?
Yes, by ricochet.
And is there evidence of the pseudo-stippling which you talked about?
You can see that in addition to the main body of the abrasion, you can see some very small areas of abrasions or scrapes there above it and below it. And those little areas are separate impact sites. Those are separate projectiles, if you will. So this entire area is an atypical wound.
I'd like to move Exhibit 91 into evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 92, please. Doctor, what is this?
This is a picture before cleaning up. It's a picture of the palmar surface of the left hand. So this is where the injury to the left hand is located.
And can you indicate, if you can, where the entrance wound is?
So if you look at the middle finger, and to the right side of the middle finger, it's really difficult to see in this particular photograph. But to the right side of the middle finger there, that's where the beginning of the injury is at. That's where the entrance is, so to speak.
I apologize. Could you use that pointer and point it out? It is difficult to see.
Middle finger in this area, as I said, it's difficult to see, but
Can you get a
there
handheld?
is an area of injury here that represents the entrance, or the first part of the injury. You can see that there's laceration extending along here, and that's the tearing from the wound path.
Around the wound, what was the last word you said?
Tearing from the wound path.
From the wound path?
Yes.
Why don't I give you that, and why don't you just stay there, and we'll try to do it this way. Did everyone hear that? Now, there's some dark markings all over the hand. What is that?
Those markings that you're referring to are here, 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 and around the entrance. There's also some this finger and up here. All of these areas that look kind of black or dark gray are areas of soot deposition. So that's where soot has attached to the skin.
Let's move Exhibit 92 into evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Next exhibit, please. Doctor, what are we looking at here?
This is a photograph that shows the exit wound from the left hand. So what you're looking at here is the index finger and the thumb, and this irregular area here, this round area, is the exit point.
Let's move Exhibit 93 into evidence.
Any objection?
Can I have the number again?
93.
No objection.
Proceed.
Now, and that is the exit wound that you believe would have then went and struck perhaps the pavement and caused the thigh injury?
Yes.
Let's see, what is it marked as 94? Exhibit 94, do you recognize that?
This is another photograph of the palmar surface of the left hand. And again, you can see this is the rounded area here, the beginning of the wound path. Here, this tearing here. This is all the laceration or tearing that extends along the wound path. This black material here, here, here. You can see a little bit here too. All that black material is the soot. And the exit wound is going to be on the other side of the hand, about right here.
I'd like to move Exhibit 94 into evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Next, please. Exhibit 95. And doctor, what is this?
A bit better, you can see the injury to the middle finger here again. You can see the irregularity to it. You can see the black soot. You can see some soot up here as well. In the background, you can see the tearing. But this is basically showing the injury to the middle finger.
What is the whiteness sort of in the middle of the finger? Are those bones or ligaments or what is that?
Actually, to the index finger, you're probably seeing this. It's a little more red or pink, but there you could see the ligament to the middle finger. The index finger, there was both exposed ligament and fragments of bone. That's where the fracture was at.
So Exhibit 95 in evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Next, please. Let's see what is marked as States Exhibit 96. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
This is a picture before it's cleaned up. This is a picture of the entrance wound to the right groin region. The genitalia would be in the upper right corner there, next to the top of the scale. There's a lot of blood on this, so it's difficult to see things, but the entrance wound is right here.
And what is the redness around the wound?
That's all blood there. So there's wet and dried blood still to the surface of the body. This is before he's been cleaned up and rephotographed.
I'd like to move Exhibit 96 in evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Doctor, what is this?
This photograph is a picture of Mr. Rosenbaum's back. You can see the entrance wound is this dark round injury here. There is a pattern of gunpowder stippling to the left side of the back that extends around the wound, so you can see it extending all the way from the back of the left shoulder down to the area around the entrance wound.
I'd like to move Exhibit 97 into evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Doctor, I'd like to show you Exhibit 98. What is this?
This is a cleaned up photograph, so after the removal of blood, this is a cleaned up photograph of the graze wound to the right side of the head.
So this is after that Mr. Rosenbaum has been washed or cleaned up.
That's correct.
I'd like to move Exhibit 98 in evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Doctor, this is Exhibit 99. What is this?
This is a closer photograph of the left hand showing the exit wound. What you're looking at is the thumb is here to the left, the index finger is underneath the scale, and this round area is the exit wound.
Let's move Exhibit 99 to evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Doctor, what are we looking at here?
This is the injury to the left hand after it's been cleaned up somewhat. You can see here's the thumb, the index finger, the middle finger. This area along the middle finger is a ragged area which represents the beginning of the wound path that we described earlier. You can see the black areas here all along the wound as well as to the adjacent ring finger. That's all soot. You can see some of the soot here at the base of the index finger. And again, there's this laceration that extends along the palmar surfaces of those two fingers.
Let's move Exhibit 100 into evidence.
No objection.
Proceed.
Doctor, what are we looking at here?
This photograph depicts this is the knee right here in the middle. This injury up here is that atypical injury to the lower lateral left thigh. You can see the main body of the irregular abrasion. You can see the smaller abrasion surrounding it. This right here to the left knee is an abrasion or scrape. So this is just a scrape of the left knee.
And what relevance do you believe this has to this case?
It possibly could have happened when he went down to the ground or was on the ground.
That can exhibit 101 into evidence.
No objection.
Received.
And for the final exhibit, Doctor, what is this?
This is a close-up photograph after he's been cleaned up of the entrance gunshot wound to the right groin.
I can exhibit 102 into evidence.
No objection.
Received.
You may sit back down. Thank you, Doctor. Now, as a medical examiner, is all you do or all you're allowed to do is look at the body?
No.
What else can your medical examiner, is it fair to say you perform an investigation?
Yes, we collect information about the circumstances of the case. We'll look at photographs, scene photographs or other photographs. We'll look at video from scenes. We'll look at a lot of different things in order to understand the circumstances better and perhaps help us to answer other questions.
And did you review anything else in this case that would aided you in your investigation in terms of Mr. Rosenbaum?
Several things were reviewed from Mr. Rosenbaum, specifically a video, YouTube video was referenced to exemplify the circumstances of the shooting. I reviewed some other records, medical records and things, which is routine, but that was about it with Mr. Rosenbaum.
Dr. Rittenhouse is marked as Defense Exhibit 41. If you do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is that?
That appears to be an introductory screen from a video that was referenced to me. I was told to look at this video for reference in seeing the scene of the shooting better.
And is that because it's the same video that Dr. Jensen, the defense expert, reviewed?
Yes, I believe so.
After watching that video, are you able to tell us anything about the first two gunshots?
If trying to determine some kind of order of gunshots, obviously the autopsy itself is not going to allow us to do that. We can use the injuries and the details about those injuries to help us, but the autopsy alone is not going to allow you to do that, and also is not going to allow you to know what position the person is in when they were shot. We put things in terms of anatomic position, but we seldom know exactly what position they were in when the gunshot wound was incurred. So the use of the video can sometimes be helpful in answering those questions. And really, with regards to the video, and there really was only one very small portion of that entire video that helps me, and I think that it's the portion where there's actually some sound, so I can hear the gunshots and see the position of Mr. Rosenbaum at that time that you hear the discharge of the weapon. And so that's what I use the video for, is mainly to see what position he was in when I hear those gunshots. And so really knowing that he had these gunshot wounds to different areas. He's got an entrance wound to the front of his body, the right groin. He's got an entrance wound to the upper back. He's got a graze wound to the head. And so in looking at the video and paying attention to his body position when I heard the discharge of the weapon, I was at least able to say that the only time during the interaction in which he could have incurred the gunshot wounds to the back and to the right side of the head is when he's more horizontal. And the only time that happens is the last two gunshot wounds. So I think the first two gunshot wounds are represented by the injury to the groin and the injury to the left thigh. There is it's not the greatest video for not the clearest video, but right after the second gunshot wound, there's also some kind of a cloud. It seems there's some kind of a cloud of smoke or something like that. And I felt this was consistent with a bullet hitting the pavement and creating that cloud, and therefore that would be related to the injury to the left thigh. So really, that's how I use the video, just to determine when he's in position to receive certain gunshot wounds.
So, Doctor, is your testimony that in the video you reviewed, which the jury has seen, the first gunshots are while Mr. Rosenbaum is facing Mr. Rittenhouse?
Yes.
And you said that at least one of those was intermediate, out to 4 feet away?
Yes.
And then you see in the video that Mr. Rosenbaum continues going forward, and he begins to tilt or fall. And is it your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that the back-to-front shots to the head and then the kill shot to the back would have been while he was falling or perpendicular to the ground?
The only way that the trajectories of the gunshot wounds to the right side of the head and the back make sense is if he's more horizontal to the ground, and that is occurring at the time that the last two gunshot wounds are heard on the video.
Doctor, in your, to the best of your medical knowledge and opinion, if an individual is moving forward and they sustain that injury that entered by the groin and went to the hip, could that cause them to fold forward and kind of move forward or move down in a downward position?
That's possible. There's a very complex fracture involving the right side of the pelvis, which may make the pelvis and the right leg more unstable, but all I can say is that that's a possibility.
Doctor, we talked about this hand wound and how that occurred. If someone is pointing a rifle at you, an AR-15, do you have an explanation of how that hand could be positioned that would result in the injury shown, and then also perhaps the injury to the thigh from that same round?
Well, as I said, this is a close range injury, and so his hand is in close proximity or in contact with the end of that rifle. So you can kind of think of it in your head. You know, if you put the end of the rifle close to that trajectory through his hand, you move the hand around. You can put it in different relationships to the body that can explain that. Typically, by turning the palm towards the ground, it would make sense that it could go through the hand, hit the ground, and then create the injuries to the left side of the thigh.
So it's consistent that the hand with the palm was to the ground, and then it would have entered by the middle finger, gone through, and then exited the end of the index finger, and then hit the ground?
Yes.
And just to be clear, we've only heard 4 gunshots. Is it possible that the 4 gunshots caused all 5 wounds?
Yes.
Everything further, thank you.
Let's take a break. Please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. Let's aim for actual time of 11 o'clock.
Good afternoon. It's still morning. Sorry, it's been a long day. Doctor, talking about generally stippling, stifling, comes, if this, I'm holding up the pointer, the back end of the pointer, the thick end, the barrel of the gun here. Do we have agreement with that?
Yes.
If this gun fires a projectile, the first thing that comes out, and I'm not saying in order, but what would show nearness is soot stippling, correct?
Correct.
And then further out would be gunpowder stippling.
Yes, soot and then gunpowder.
Okay, and in the soot stippling, it has to be, generally speaking, as you said, either in contact or within a foot.
Yes, it's within a few inches. It's very close.
Okay, and when you looked at the state's exhibit, you said it was either very close or in contact, and we're talking about the hand wound.
Yes, it could be within that range. Okay. So it could have been in contact.
Okay, and as I said, if this is the barrel of the gun, this is my left hand, the barrel of the gun had to be somewhere in this area, correct?
That's correct.
Now, the soot stippling, and I'm pointing with the pointer to my baby finger, there is no soot stippling here, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. The bulk of it starts between what would be the ring and commonly referred to as middle finger?
Yes.
Okay, so that means the barrel of the gun, if not touching, would have been like this.
It's in that location, that's
Okay.
correct.
So that hand was over the barrel of Mr. Rittenhouse's gun when his hand was shot.
That makes sense.
Okay, and the bullet goes into the fingers and then out through here. And I'm showing the fat part of the in between my index and thumb.
Yes, the exit is to the index finger, but it's on the back of the lateral side of that finger, yes.
And exhibit 105, please. What we just went over, I'm showing you an exhibit, be up on the screen. It's been marked Defense Exhibit 105. You see that photo exhibit?
Yes.
Okay, and that's Mr. Rosenbaum's hand,
His left hand, correct.
left hand, and you took that photograph, correct?
Yes.
Circle on here to the best of your ability where the soot starts.
Yeah.
Okay, can you draw a line off of there into where it can be seen and then just put your initials? Thank you. And you've put the circle on the ring finger, correct?
Correct.
Leaving the baby finger uncircled and blank, correct?
Correct. I don't
Because
see any.
you don't see any soot there, right?
Correct.
Would move exhibit 105 into evidence.
Objection?
No.
Proceed.
Would ask to publish it to the jury.
Already on the screen.
Objection. Okay, go ahead.
The- Now, you would agree that this shooting of Mr. Rosenbaum, which is captured partially on video, is a dynamic situation, correct?
Correct.
And if the furthest he was away with the stifling that you see in the wounds was 4 feet and closing, that goes very quickly, correct? If someone's running at you?
Yes.
Okay, and 4 feet, correct me if I'm wrong, is about from me to you away.
That's about correct.
And if I had my hands out, I'm even closer, correct?
Yes.
If I'm lunging, and going for your gun, which is an extension away from your body, closer still.
Yes.
And you saw the video that Dr. Jensen reviewed, and he was running, correct?
He was.
The wound in the back, when you talk about, I cannot say that word, anatomically correct position?
Atomic position, yes.
That's, as I'm standing here before you, standing straight, with you said palms forward.
Correct, anatomic position.
Okay.
I think you had me doing it.
Okay. And the wound enters his back,
That's correct.
okay, and goes down and across.
Correct.
Okay, we're not, and I know the prosecution covered it, but we're not saying that he was turned and shot in the back, correct?
That's correct.
There's nothing in the hand shot that shows him, would lead you to believe that his hands are up like this surrendering, correct?
That's correct. I did not see that in the video.
And your theory or your belief to a reasonable degree of medical certainty is that he's in a horizontal position close to my client. The bullet goes in and across and down.
That's correct.
Okay? So once again, in the position of lunging would put you in a horizontal position, correct?
It would.
And there's some stippling to the wound in the pelvis, correct?
Yes, to the lower abdomen above
Okay,
it.
and that's not trying to, but there, it starts at the belt line and goes up, correct?
That's right.
Okay, and as it starts at the belt line and goes up, the reason it's not below the belt line is because he was wearing pants when he was shot, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And that was also, that was gunpowder stippling.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's basically 1 foot to 4 feet.
Yes.
And hate to jump around here, but the wound on Mr. Huber, I'm assuming at some point you pulled off that bandage that was on the wound?
Yes,
Okay, now, was there stippling on that wound?
there was, yes.
Okay, and that wound was what kind of stippling?
Well, gunpowder stippling, so that wound has the impacts from the gunpowder particles.
Okay.
A more dense distribution.
Did you look at the clothing around the wound?
On Mr. Huber?
On Mr. Huber?
Yes.
Okay, and the clothing also had gunpowder residue?
A little more difficult to say on the clothing. I can, Mr. Huber's tank top, which was the item of clothing that came with him, that tank top it was a tie-dyed black and gray and white appearance, so made that very difficult. So in those situations, usually I will defer to try to opine if I can't tell for sure.
Okay, so there's nothing in that gunshot wound that suggests that he wasn't in close contact with my client's firearm.
That's right.
Okay, and did you look at any video regarding that shooting?
Yes, it's also included in that video provided.
And the video shows that my client's lying on his back, correct?
Yes,
Mr. Huber grabs the firearm, correct?
it appears so, yes.
Pulls the firearm from one direction towards and into his chest, correct?
They end up in that position. I don't know if he's pulling or what. I don't know what's going on there.
Mr. Huber strikes him with the skateboard. The gun is not in his chest. Fair statement?
That fair statement.
Okay. When he's shot, the skateboard is in his right hand. The gun is now up in his chest.
I would object. These are conclusions based on
I'm asking if his wound is consistent with this scenario.
Go ahead. Finish your question.
Okay, I'll start over. Mr. Huber, you see him hit my client in the head with a skateboard, correct?
Yes.
And
What's the objection?
These are conclusions that Mr. Huber hit or did anything is central to this case. These are not conclusions that anyone can make but the jury.
He said, the doctor said he watched the video, and so I'm assuming that that's his knowledge base, and you can redirect on the subject if you want.
I'll start again, sir. There is a blow from Mr. Huber to my client's head with a skateboard, correct?
Yes, the skateboard makes contact
Okay.
with Mr.
He swings the skateboard with his right hand into my client's back neck range, correct?
I'm not sure where it makes impact, but
You see an impact.
yeah, it makes contact.
And he reaches down with his left hand, seeming to grab my client's gun, correct?
Yes.
When he puts his hand on the gun, the barrel is not pointing in his chest, correct?
I don't recall, but I don't think so.
Okay. And through whatever movement between my client and Mr. Huber, the gun barrel ends up, which would be right about here,
It does.
okay? And there's a gunshot, correct?
Yes.
And that gun is touching his clothes.
It's in intermediate range. It's
So,
closer.
and define intermediate range for me, please.
Well, again, we've talked about how intermediate range injuries can be within 4 feet, but it obviously from the video it's closer than that. But I can't say whether the muzzle is in contact with
Okay.
his
But
clothing.
through the type of stippling that you have on the Huber wound, you know it's less than 4 feet. Fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
Through independent evidence, which you review as a forensic pathologist / investigator, the video evidence establishes closer.
It does.
And just assume, for the purposes of this question, that the first shot from my client, moving back to Mr. Rosenbaum now, is the 0 shot, number 1. The fourth shot is 76 hundredths of a second after that. That is how fast the 4 shots were fired out of my client's gun. And he's goes from the furthest 4 feet to touching the gun, correct?
Yes.
That calls for speculation.
Doctor answered yes. Overall,
And your opining regarding the order of shots, is that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty or medical certainty? I apologize.
Medical certainty, as I pointed out, from the autopsy findings alone, you can't put these in order. It's only by reviewing the video and simply looking at the orientation of his body and comparing that to the findings on the body that you can do that. So to that degree of certainty, it appears that he's in that horizontal position.
And Mr. Krause asked it, the shot to the pelvis, you think is first?
I think that makes the most sense.
Okay. The shot that goes in the scalp, second?
No, I think that the only orientation that makes sense with the trajectory of the gunshot wound to the back and the right side of the head is when he's in more of a horizontal position. So those two injuries must be the third and the fourth injuries. But that's the best I can do.
The head wound goes back to front and from the top of the head down towards the forehead.
That's right.
Okay, so if I was charging like a bull and diving, that would be consistent.
It would be.
I have nothing further.
Direct.
Doctor, the injuries you noted, they'd also be consistent with falling after being struck in the hip?
Yes.
So if Mr. Rosenbaum was struck in the hip, that to say, his momentum kept carrying him forward, he was falling, the other 3 shots could have been as he was falling.
That's possible too.
It's consistent with that.
It is.
What is a muzzle stamp?
Well, a muzzle stamp is what we briefly talked about earlier with contact gunshot wounds, and if the energy of the bullet entering the body causes the skin to smack against the muzzle of the gun, it can leave an abrasion, even a patterned abrasion in the shape of the muzzle of the gun on the skin. And so a muzzle stamp is a term that's used for a contact abrasion that's associated with a contact gunshot wound. And the reason why when we talked about a close range wound to the hand, the reason why we didn't talk about that, although it could be in close range like that, is because the skin of the palm is much thicker, and it very seldom, if ever, allows for a muzzle stamp or an abrasion of that sort. Certainly not like you would see with a contact wound to the head or to the chest.
So there was no muzzle stamp in this case?
No.
Okay, I'd like to ask Investigator Stute to pull up Exhibit 41, but as we're doing that, Doctor, if this is the gun, if you could stand up, please. If I'm holding a rifle, let's just say that I've shot you in the hip, how does it make sense that the gunshot to the hand occurs in the trajectory you've indicated?
So this points in the direction. Oh, thank you.
You can use this.
Stand
back there.
Hold that.
No, I know, I'm fine here.
Okay. So we're talking about the left hand. The injuries are to the palmar surface of the index and the middle fingers. The exit is to the side of the index finger. So obviously it's hard to do this completely, but it's like this. So in the anatomic position, it looks like that. But keeping in mind that your arm and your hand move in a lot of different ways. So, so if you were to take the hand and you were to be in a position in which the hand was like this with the palm kind of downward, you could orient this so that you could explain the gunshot wound going down and hitting the pavement, and then the fragments hitting the left side of the thigh.
If you could put your hand out again, Doctor, like you had. So, but the barrel would have to be behind the injury, correct?
Yes.
So the bullet would have had to travel outside of the barrel, so the barrel would have been had to have been in front of or somehow separated from where the wound took place.
Well, that's what I said. I can't tell that. This is a close range wound with soot, but there isn't going to be a muzzle stamp because of the skin of the palm. So it's within that distance, but whether it's in contact or whether it's just in front of it, of the entrance portion of the wound, or inches away, that's not something I can tell you.
investigation you just indicated be consistent with swiping something away? Swiping a barrel away?
I can't tell you what he was doing at the time that happened. All I can tell you is that at the time of the discharge of the weapon and the traveling of that bullet into his hand, this is the trajectory that it took through his hand. I can't tell you what he was doing at the time, and I can't see it on the video. The video's not good enough for that.
Exhibit 41, please. Could holding something in your hand, could that impact the wounds or the stippling or the soot or anything of that nature?
You mean, well, I mean, if you're holding something in your hand and you're referring to some kind of something that's going to create an intermediary target or something, yeah, that can affect the appearance of wounds. You know, the injury might look very different in that case.
So when Attorney Richards was talking to you about the wound to Mr. Rosenbaum's left hand, and there's blood everywhere and there's soot many places, if he was holding, say, a handle of something, would you expect that the soot and the
This calls for speculation. There's been no evidence whatsoever that he had anything in his hand.
Questions must be asked to a reasonable degree of post-mortem autopsy certitude. Would that be a fair way to put it?
I'm not really sure I understand the question.
You're not the first. You hesitated before when asked about medical certitude, which is a common expression we use in the courts, and I'm trying to see what degree of, how would you phrase the degree of certitude with which you would typically respond?
Well, I can testify to a reasonable degree of medical certainty when I'm using the autopsy findings and the meaning of those in reference to the injuries. I've seen the video. As I have testified, I discussed the video with regards to his position when I heard the gunshot wounds discharge. I can't really see what's going on in front of him at those times. So when the questions are going into those specifics, I don't think I can answer those from the video that I watched. So I think I'm trying to be careful not to evaluate that video more than I used it for, which is to determine what position he was in when those gunshot wounds were received.
Why don't you rephrase your question? What's required here for the state, certainly, but frankly for both parties, but is a degree of certitude to which the physician can testify.
The injuries and everything you testified to on the left hand, that's consistent with nothing being in his hand?
It is, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 41. If you can tell, is this the video that you reviewed in terms of both the shooting deaths of Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Huber?
It is.
I'd ask you to play the video until I ask you to stop.
Hey!
Can you see where on there you indicate that he would be positioned with the first shot?
Yes, I can clearly see the reflection of the light on his back, and I can see that he's upright when the first shot is heard.
So that would not be consistent with the shot to the hand?
No, I think that's. I think that placing the hand in that position would affect the gunpowder stippling to his lower abdomen. So I don't think the hand is involved in that first shot.
So, to best of your, so it's consistent that the first shot is to the hip,
That's what I feel. That's what I think. Yes.
and then the second shot would be to the hand,
Yes.
and then the third or fourth shot. Can you order those any more specifically?
No.
But they would be as he's in a horizontal position, perhaps falling after being struck in the hip.
That's right.
Let's show Exhibit 86, please. Play the exhibit. I'll ask you to pause it. Pause. Doctor, did you see that large amount of smoke that was emitted from the gun?
Yes.
Now, with that amount of smoke out of an AR-15, would that impact how far the stippling may occur?
Would the smoke impact?
The large amount of smoke. Would the stippling go further out than the 4 feet?
No, I don't think there's not a relationship there. The stippling is the gunpowder particles that are flying through the air and dispersing as they travel. The smoke is the smoke and soot from the barrel of the gun.
Does the amount of gunpowder matter in the stippling?
Well, yes,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it does. I mean, you know, there's the number of gunpowder particles that leave the barrel of the gun are not predictable, certainly, but they will, you know, travel in a dense group and then disperse as they get farther away, with more and more falling to the side until none have the energy to create stippling to the skin.
Now, when you see that large puff of smoke, you said that would be that is what would potentially leave soot on a individual?
My presumption is that soot, that puff was the smoke and soot from the end of the gun.
So with that large amount of soot, would it be possible to deposit soot further out than just a few inches?
I don't know if I can answer that question. Again, you know, test firing the weapon, you might be able to derive more information, but certainly soot's not very aerodynamic. It doesn't travel very far.
Now, Attorney Richards did a demonstration with you where he stood about 4 feet away and talked about the intermediate range. Now, we're in talking about intermediate range, you're talking about feet from the barrel of the gun, not from the shooter?
Correct. To be specific, the injuries that we're talking about are from the barrel of the gun to the surface that they make impact with. So the surface of the body in this case.
And you haven't seen the actual weapon in this case, have you?
No, I have not.
So I'm going to ask Detective Venturini to point the gun at me.
Check it again.
Yeah.
Check it again.
No need.
Show you.
Okay.
Empty.
Goes against every training I've ever had.
So if he was to point the gun at me, I'd have to be 4 feet from the barrel of this gun, or 1 to 4 feet to generate the stippling you're talking about?
Inside of 4 feet, like I said, that's an outside number.
Is that approximately where I would be right now?
It's about 4 feet, maybe a little closer.
I'll get a ruler, but that's more than 4 feet.
It would be my impression that is a greater distance than 4 feet.
Well, I'm not bad at distances. Is this 4 feet approximately?
It's a little hard to tell, but you're closer. You're probably about 4 feet there.
More than one of my arm's lengths anyway?
More than one of your arm's length.
Thank you. I'd rather further.
Recross?
You can keep it out. Doctor, the soot is within 6 inches, correct? The soot stippling?
Oh, the soot. The soot is within inches.
The intermediate gunpowder stippling is within 4 feet.
Approximately, yes.
And if the first shot is, you can hold it. Here, detective. Keeping it down. If this is the barrel of the gun and the 0 shot is the first shot, and somewhere from, and I'm not as good as or as bad, I don't know, but let's say this is about 4 feet from the barrel of the gun.
It's a little farther than 4 feet, I would say.
Okay, so I'm even a little bit further, but from the furthest he is would be 4 feet. He could have been as close as here with the first shot, correct?
Possibly, but the density of the gunpowder stippling it's pretty spread out, so I think it's a little further away.
And I'm using my right hand because I'm going down. Left hand is slow.
You know, these gloves got into court here about 10 years ago, and I understand there are appropriate times to use them, but not everything that...
I don't know why I'm using it.
I don't know why you're
I
putting a
do.
glove on, to be
Okay.
honest with you. You're not going to get the cooties from that.
No, I agree.
All right.
These are bigger.
So here,
Well, what difference does it make? It's
the end of the gun, touching with my left hand like this. The heavy soot is right here.
Where you're with your right hand, but yeah,
The heavy. See, then I got to go to the other side.
yeah, you have to
Jury.
turn around.
Can you switch with me? So if it's the left hand, we're going to go like right. Can you see this, doctor?
You actually have to turn your hand over.
Over, like this.
No, go the opposite direction, like this.
Like,
There you go.
okay. And you would then come in approximately here,
That's the entry point to the hand, yes.
exiting where I'm pointing with my index finger.
Correct.
And the reason there's no soot stippling here is because it's past where fire comes up.
I can only say that there's no soot there.
Okay, there's no, okay.
I know these people are here for news purposes, the photographers, but I actually think for purposes of the record, I'd like them to come up and get a closer shot.
Am I positioning my hand correct?
I believe so.
It would be more like this because the exit wound right here, as I pointed to.
Yes.
And just so the record's clear, my hand is touching the end of the barrel.
hand is now touching the barrel.
Okay. And if my hand were in front of the barrel, there would be soot here. And I'm pointing now to, what would you call this part of the body, sir?
I would call it the outside of the pinky finger so that it's understandable.
The outside of the pinky finger, if my hand was in front of the barrel, the heaviest soot would be in that location, correct?
You would expect soot in that location.
And
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but some of the jurors I don't think are able to see, so let's, you got your shot. So, you go ahead.
the pinky finger, once again illustrating the side of my hand, if it was in front of the barrel, as it's now depicted, the heaviest soot would be here.
You would expect some soot on that side of the hand.
And there is,
And I didn't see any.
I don't know.
Would you send copies of those photos? Send copies of those photos to the clerk, please. Send copies of those photos to the clerk. Thank you.
So, doctor, is it consistent if I'm approaching the detective and I'm struck in my hip, fracturing my hip, that I would fall, reach out with my hand and try to knock the gun away?
That's a possibility.
Am I positioning my hand correctly with the evidence?
Your hand is, you put your hand over
Well, we don't know if it's over, so
like this.
Oh.
Well, just in a position so that the soot is on the palmar surface,
Like this?
like this. So if you go in and you,
So the entrance wound is here.
no, the entrance wound is on the palmar surface, the undersurface.
Palmar surface.
So if you do it, Superman, and then turn your hand a little bit like this, you can put it in a position that there you go,
Like this.
like that.
So what you're saying is consistent with being shot here, momentum carried forward, and swiping at the gun. That would be consistent with the injuries you found.
Those scenarios are possible.
But my hand is positioned correctly to create the injuries that you found.
That's the position that the hand has to be in.
And then the bullet would have traveled down and potentially kicked up some bullet fragments and concrete and hit my leg.
That's what I think happened.
And then I would have continued down, and then the shot to the head and the mid-back would have occurred as I was falling down.
As you're more horizontal to the ground, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Doctor, when you get shot the first time, that doesn't cause you to go forward, correct?
It shouldn't cause you to go forward, backward, or
Okay.
anything.
So he already, Mr. Rosenbaum, already had to have forward momentum at a force to go from the zero shot to the second shot in 2.26 hundredths of a second to be in contact or right on top of that barrel, correct?
Yes, he had forward momentum.
Thank you.
Nothing further. Nothing further.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. You may step down. Let's break for lunch. It has just arrived, I think, and we'll take until around 12:30. Any questions? Okay, please don't talk about the case. Read, watch, or listen to any account. See you later. on occasion, when things don't, they're not going to show up well in the record, I'll either myself or have one of the parties take a picture. So we have experts to do it today, and the price was right. Mark? Send them to Mrs. Yeah.
What time would you like us back?
12:30.
Your Honor, I do want to indicate on the record now that the state intends to rest. We've had some discussions regarding the testimony of Brandon Cramen. My understanding from the defense is that I think there's an agreement that essentially the court will just inform the jury that his testimony should be disregarded, and we're not going to go back into that.
Stricken.
Okay.
Right.
Fair enough.
So I don't know when we want to address any motions outside the presence of the jury, but that's what I intend to do when we return.